fun afternoon. Hopefully you enjoyed the conversation with Neil and his panel on first customer programs. Joseph Cabral is a professor at LSU and has written a number of really interesting academic papers on CVC, and I had the pleasure of getting to know him on my podcast. Actually, all three of the panelists and Joseph were on my podcast, Agile Giants. So these are kind of friends of the Corporate Startup Lab, and I think each have a really interesting perspective on CVC. When I was trying to put this together, I couldn't think of anybody better, though, than Joseph to moderate and sort of lead this discussion. So, Joseph, I'm going to hand it over to you and just listen in the background here. But thanks for doing this, and thanks to all the panelists for participating as well.
All right. Thank you, Sean, for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. So to make sure the audience is on the same page with the rest of us, this panel is about corporate venture capital. So it's about established large corporations buying ownership in smaller companies and using it as a mechanism to supplement their innovation activities. So Sean and his team have put together a really impressive panel, diverse panel of industries, careers, experiences, models to CVC. So joining me today is Rich Grant from Touchdown Ventures, Paul Nielsen from Optum Technology, and Vin Tang from Samsung Q Fund. And I thought we could start off with each of you just introducing yourself and discussing your role within your organization before we dive in. So Rich, do you want to start off?
Sure, and I apologize. I don't know if my connection just somehow went out, but hopefully I'm good now. So, hi everyone. It's nice to virtually meet everyone. But
Joseph,
my name is Rich Grant. I'm one of the founders of a firm called Touchdown Ventures, and we're about a 6.5-year-old firm where really the entire premise around our firm is that there's likely 5,000 or more large corporations out there that have the financial means, could bring a lot of value to, get a lot of value from venture investing in the startup ecosystem. And it's really our role to partner with these large organizations and help them launch and then on an ongoing basis actively manage those venture efforts. And so that's really, sort of our background and our premise. I've been on the CVC side for the last 10 years, first at Comcast Ventures and obviously more recently with Touchdown, and really have spent my entire 20-year career in the corporate innovation realm, and am excited to talk about how venture sort of fits into that ecosystem of innovation.
Paul, do you want to go next?
Sure. So Paul Nielsen, I lead what's called strategic programs within Optum Technology, and there's a couple pillars in there. One of those are strategic relationships with research institutions like Carnegie Mellon University, and then, of course, industry partners like NVIDIA or Google or Intel, and then smaller companies that have technologies, capabilities that can help on our digital transformation agenda, accelerate that. My program overall is around transformation, both from a culture and from a technology perspective, and the acceleration of that. So I launched the Optum Startup Studio, which Sean mentioned earlier, and that's right here in Pittsburgh. And that's an early stage incubator, accelerator kind of hybrid model. And I also launched the Optum College of AI, which is also something that we partnered with Carnegie Mellon on in terms of building executive education programs around AI and data science. But my background is I spent 25 years in startups prior to coming to UHG. And so you guys all know, coming from the startup world or investing in startups, the very different culture, very different speed in which innovation occurs in a small, nimble startup as opposed to a very large, very structured organization. And so my role here is to bring that transformation, my experience from outside in small companies and innovating and bringing new technology to an industry, and bring that culture and practice into this very mature company who we're trying to transition from an IT type organization culture to a engineering, product-centered, innovation-focused organization.
Corporate venture capital ends up being this mechanism that spans the large incumbent organization and, as Paul just said, that startup world. And for the audience members that are maybe less familiar with it, could each of you give your perspective on maybe the key benefits, but also the key challenges for these relationships from both perspectives, from the startup and the incumbent? Rich, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think venture is a really powerful tool for large corporations, obviously, to engage and drive value from sort of startups. I think some of the benefits, certainly, the fact that you're investing capital attracts a lot of companies to you. Capital is oxygen for these startups. And if you can add additional value on top of that, whether it be a commercial relationship, some sort of mentorship, what have you, because you've got all these subject matter experts. It really attracts a lot of startups to you. It enables you to have a different type of conversation than you might have if you were coming or approaching these companies with an M&A lens or with a partnership lens. But it also enables you to do a bunch of different things with that. Certainly, you can invest and gain your sort of financial benefits from that. But more so, you have sort of a menu of options in which you can, kind of engage with these companies. Maybe you don't want to invest, maybe you do, but you could still partner with them in some way, shape, or form. You could use the investment to reinforce that partnership. Maybe it's more appropriate for M&A, and you can surface that as an option, or this, venture investment can be sort of onboarding to that. It starts the conversation with really interesting, sort of talent. Maybe it's a talent acquisition vehicle, or at least a way to align and sort of collaborate with some really interesting folks that aren't within the four walls of the company. And you can use it to address different business problems. Maybe it's about diversification. Maybe it's about solving a near term product roadmap. There's all these number of business problems and issues that you can use venture capital as one of the tools to help sort of solve. So I think there's a lot of benefits there. Certainly, and I think Paul kind of alluded to some of the challenges. Oftentimes different startups work at a different pace. They talk a different language than corporations. One of the big things in venture capital or corporate venture capital is, mutual value creation. Sometimes large companies just aren't, sort of used to having mutual benefit. It's sort of a winner take all type dynamic. And so really trying to work through those types of issues and serve as kind of a translator between the two and a bridge between the two, making sure that we're talking the same language, we understand the timing, and that we're really trying to, sort of do something that's going to be mutually beneficial, or some of the things that, the watch outs that you have to really work at as a CVC.
All right, Paul, do you want to discuss what you see as maybe the biggest benefits and challenges for the startup and the incumbent corporation?
Sure. So first of all, we have 3 venture capital groups within UHG. Each have a different charter. I sit within Optum Technology, and Optum Technology is the entity that, as it sounds, develops technology software applications for our lines of businesses. So one thing that's unique about us is that Optum, or UHG as an entity, is in every part of the healthcare ecosystem. We have the largest HSA bank, Optum Bank. We have the, I think, second or third largest mail order pharmaceutical plan management company, Optum RX. And then we go all the way the other side. Well, everybody knows about UHC, the payer. That's what most people think we are, is just a payer. But then we've been very heavily investing into the clinical care delivery organization. So we acquired WellMed, we acquired MedExpress, there's others across the Vita Group for the dialysis, and we're building specialty surgical centers across the country. So that being said, our technology requirements to try to bring modern practices, automation into it is very broad. Our Optum Ventures, which is a late stage investment group based out of Boston, they come in at around a B round. And so where Optum Startup Studio came in to bridge that very early stage, really almost incubation, acceleration, and into Optum Tech as a way to take the use cases that we generate from our businesses. So we're strategic. We're looking for solutions that address our automation agenda, but we're also looking to be able to help the industry as a whole, because that will benefit everybody if we can, move this industry forward to have more open interoperability, like, sharing of health records. Those kind of things are very difficult today. So the challenges we had were internally, because we are very large. Optum Tech is roughly 22,000 employees, and 80% are engineers. We're spread between India, Ireland, and then across several centers in the U.S. to try to innovate in an organization that large can be very difficult simply because there's an awful lot of processes and governance and things that have to be in place. Well, you question whether they have to be, but are in place because we're a very large organization, right? Very financially driven, right? And so, innovation doesn't necessarily always have a return on every bet you make, right? Because they are bets. So, and you need to be able to move quickly. You need to be able to pivot quickly if you see that the direction you're going to isn't going to get to where you want to be, or maybe the industry changed, maybe the requirements change, so you have to pivot along with that change. So so the biggest challenges are just trying to move quickly. Our advantage is that we bring in all these SMEs and lines of businesses that to a startup in healthcare. Healthcare is very difficult to break into. It's highly regulated. You really need a big brother in this industry to break in as a startup. You need somebody to sponsor you. So we bring in this huge domain knowledge because we've been here for so long. We have almost 130 million members that we manage. So we have all of that clinical lab and RX data for decades. And then we have all these different areas of the industry that we're in, like I said, from every part of the ecosystem. So we can bring in this startup that has an idea and bring our SMEs, both from the business side, from the technical side. Much of what we do requires, or much of what the automation that's required in the industry requires data. So we can bring the data that you just can't get anywhere else. And of course, we would de-identify it, aggregate it, do what we have to do to protect it. But with all those tools, we can enable these startups to actually, penetrate the industry. And our goal is to, because it's early stage, once they come through, it gets to demo day. We're run like Techstars or others. Our executives come in. We also invite partners in from outside and venture capitalists. We may, think that it's a great idea and right off the bat want to just hire these guys and buy them out on the spot, or most likely they'll need more time to incubate. So Optum Tech will then bring them in and incubate them within Optum Technology, and then find the business that they're relevant to and create pilots for them so that they can mature their product before it goes to the next stage. And then at that point, it could become an opportunity for Optum Ventures, right? Because we will treat them like a vendor. It will be we'll have a contract in place and they'll have revenue and we'll let them mature and learn with our help.
Great. So a great segue. One of the things that I constantly hear people say a lot is, corporate venture capital, we're going out there and, maybe we have some sort of broad agenda that, the higher ups in the organization have asked us to look at or think about in terms of how the market's being disrupted or where we can go. On the other hand, you're out there, you're experiencing startups, you're making relationships, and you're gleaning insights about the market. And then the friction point becomes, how does that information get back into the organization? And how does it become actionable insights that ultimately derives value for the organization? So do y'all have any opinions or best practices about maintaining a dialogue so you know what the higher ups are looking for and the strategic areas they're asking you to emphasize, but as well as how whatever you're discovering makes it to the people that need to know? So Rich, I guess we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's probably one of the biggest challenges, within sort of corporate venture. We work with more than a dozen large corporations, and each one of them it's a little different, right? The organization is set up differently. The strategies and approaches for communication, which will resonate, are a little different. What we found is, obviously one size doesn't fit all. But our experience has found that if you can set up a consistent cadence with folks, so, and you really look at different levels, maybe the BUs we want to engage with on a, monthly or every other month basis. And then certainly bring them in an ad hoc way if they can be helpful around, sort of diligence or portfolio company support. the executive team. Maybe that's quarterly or semi-annual, and really also trying to define, not only, the cadence, but what are the deliverables? What is the conversation? What is our role? And what is, sort of the role of the folks on the other side of the table, so that we can, make those conversations efficient. We can get at what they're, looking to achieve, but also glean from really a lot of the insights that are, within these big companies. We talk about you can get a lot from startups. I like to say we stand on the shoulder of giants, or we sit on the shoulders of giants, because there's a tremendous amount of assets and resources within these large companies. And startups really want to know, what is a T-Mobile thinking about, or what is an Avery Dennison thinking about, too. And so it's a really interesting, place to sit if you can kind of unlock information on both sides. Obviously, being very careful. I think one of the things that you can get in real trouble within this space is sort of trading on information, or not being very genuine in how and what you're going to disclose, kind of the other side. And so you kind of have to be careful. Sometimes it really helps actually to have a kind of a third party that sort of sits in in the middle to some extent, and can be the arbiter of what sort of comes in and out of the the walls. But yeah, no, I think it's always a challenge. It's always something you sort of feel out, especially when you're getting started. And we found you try a bunch of different things, but try to be consistent, and try to really define kind of the process early on, and then tweak it as you go.
Paul, do you have anything you want to add?
Sure. So I agree with everything Rich said. We experienced the same thing, but in addition, what we do is my team. I have a small team, very small team that manages the portfolio that we have within Optum Startup Studio, but also Optum Tech has a portfolio, an M&A portfolio that we also manage. And what we have is a monthly meeting. One of the guys on my team, his sole responsibility is to meet with all our leaders on a monthly basis, and essentially checkpoint. Here's what we have in the funnel right now. Here's the companies in the cohort, the current cohort. What else? Should we be looking for anything else? They have that regular cadence, because the business, as big as we are, 6 months, their direction can change, right? Their focus today is X, but in 6 months it could be Y, right? So, that's a long time, and so we need to make sure, in relative terms, that we're focused on the right company. So that's one thing we do. I have a board, and the board is made up of all the executives who lead every one of our lines of businesses. So, Optum Care and Optum RX, Optum Bank, etc. And so quarterly, the board meets, and I review the portfolio, the use cases that we have in the funnel for the next cohort, and that's how I stay in sync at the high level. And then, of course, when we're actually dealing with the portfolio companies, I have somebody who leads, is really the liaison between the company and their needs, and finds the resources within our company to match the mentors or SMEs, etc. And we actually have a pretty strong cadence. We have a weekly cadence with these portfolio companies, so that we really take a hands-on approach. Again, healthcare is very complicated, and you really do need that expertise to make sure you're on the right direction. But that's what we do to try to keep everybody in sync and stay aligned.
All right, great.
One just additional point, which I should have also mentioned, is it's great when we can kind of translate a lot of these learnings on both sides. What's even better and more impactful, honestly, is getting the startups in front of folks at the corporation. And so we do oftentimes similar, like a demo day, that you were talking about, sector summits or whatever you want to call them, where you bring in a curated set of entrepreneurs and companies and get the right people from the company, from the corporation, and just allow them to talk. We don't have to always be the the mediator in that, or the translator. We find that to be incredibly sort of valuable as well.
Yeah, and thank you, because we actually have not quarterly, but there are 3 checkpoints before demo day that the portfolio companies will present to the executives. So they'll have an opportunity to present where they are at that stage, Q&A, and our executives get to see what's going on in the program, and and then bring up any questions, or later come back and say, I love that, or I think that's a little bit kind of outside of our domain, or whatever. But it keeps that dialogue and visibility going. Great call out, Rich.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up. So the point of this panel is to think about how CBC fits into the broader innovation activity of organizations. So would you mind commenting then on the types of projects or opportunities that are best served with a CVC type relationship, as opposed to some sort of internal development, whether it be point in development, whether it be the industry that they happen to be in and how it relates to what the corporate parent's doing. So that maybe the audience has an idea to figure out, how maybe certain projects are better served using this vehicle, as opposed to, as that one size fits all approach to innovation.
Anybody?
Go ahead, and I'll layer on top.
So that's a great question. We have very, very talented engineers of all types, right? And then we have our esteemed PhDs and fellows and distinguished engineers. So it's not that we have a lack of talent. The issue for us is speed and meeting market requirements, and also within healthcare, as you probably all know, there are new entrants into the industry that were not normal and industry companies. So Google, for example, or Amazon Haven, right, have entered the healthcare space. They move much faster than the incumbent healthcare entities. So the best projects that, or I should say, what we look for typically is where we're looking for advanced technology capabilities. Maybe it's machine learning or some sort of combination of NLP, machine learning, focused on, let's say, intelligent caller assist agents, right? As an example. And not that we can't develop that in-house, but if we want to meet a time to market, sometimes it's faster to go find a startup that has been doing this already, right? And plug them into, like I said, the healthcare ecosystem is very complicated and very big. So there's a lot of peripheral systems that it has to be integrated into. And so we look for things like that core piece that is already developed. They need our data to train, though, because that's something that's unique. So we can accelerate our agenda. We have the data. They have the models. Acquire that. They have the expertise. It's acqui-hire as well in terms of talent, and we plug them in. So we look for opportunities like that have that kind of scenario, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. And just to layer on, I thought you made a lot of great points, Paul. What we tend to find, it's not one size fits all by any means, but generally, if you're thinking about a more novel, more disruptive new technology, generally looking outside these organizations is helpful. Maybe require just a different background or talent set. The roadmaps at a lot of large companies are set, years and years in advance. It's very hard to kind of deviate. And so if you find something new, the best way to address it oftentimes is looking externally. I think there's also oftentimes, business reasons to, look outside. But, we've all heard about the innovator's dilemma. If a business model could be disruptive or destructive, very hard to justify, sort of building that yourself. But maybe aligning with a startup out there and figuring out the right way to sort of introduce that new business model, or maybe it's in an effort to find diversification and explore a new space that you're not currently in. Venture is a great tool to get your toe in the water, and really for a lot less cost, than trying to do it yourself or M&A. You can get visibility and see if something could work. and ultimately, maybe use those tools down the road, where you throw a lot more development resources against something, or maybe acquire a business that becomes very strategic. We've seen that a number of times, in sort of CVC. And so I think one of the nice things about corporate venture is it's also synergistic with all these different, sort of functions. When we come in with a venture investment, that doesn't preclude us from having a partnership or co-development relationship. Oftentimes it reinforces that, and makes it such that we have more skin in the game. Gives us, it's sort of dating before you get married, if you think about the M&A kind of context. And so there's just a lot of things that you can do with venture being, kind of part of that, sort of calculation.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was you or Scott from Touchdown. I was on a call over the beginning of the summer, and it was talking about how do we maintain this excitement in CVC when it seems like all of the corporations are pulling back. And the thing that you said that resonated with me was, you're going to be in front of a boss, and you have to say there are plenty of ideas that are coming internal and external, or coming from internal sources and external sources of our organization. And if you want to shut down things like CVC or our active programs, you're putting all of your eggs in the basket that your ideas are going to come from internally. And from you said diversification a number of times, but I think it's worthwhile to spell out that's what we were talking about, right? Some different markets, different avenues for the ideas to come from. It's always better to have different paths to discover, evaluate, and exploit opportunities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, again, it's much lower cost to sort of do that, and the risk, quite frankly, of shutting something like that down is probably greater than sort of continuing the efforts. Even through some of these tougher times, this entire industry is built on reputation, which is probably not unique to CVC, but your currency is really your reputation. And, it's very hard to sort of come back from shutting down, during a time of, real need for startups, and quite frankly, for innovation at a lot of these large corporations. Technology disruption and innovation isn't stopping because of COVID, for example. So, and it would be very difficult to sort of repair that reputation in a timely manner. And we all know how long it takes for these, sort of venture-backed companies to really, sort of grow into being relevant for a large company. It's, an early stage company, it'd be 7 to 10 years. And so if you stop now, you're just delaying the potential for impact and the timeline for impact. The old saying, the best time to plant a tree was, 30 years ago or today. Yeah. So.
God. I think the key point is it can really de-risk venturing into a new area for a large company like UHG or UHC, where we partner with a young early stage company that we want to get into a new way of doing a particular process. And if we invest internally into that, it can be a lot more in terms of the internal costs versus making a bet, investing into a startup, helping them from a SME's perspective, but they're on the outside and they're testing the market, right? And so it de-risks some of these things as well, some of these internal initiatives, and then we learn from that, and then we can take it and bring it in or acquire them entirely, based on what the experience was.
So both of you have also alluded to the fact there's different needs in the startup space that sometimes we're not as sensitive to when we're operating in that corporate mindset. And earlier on, Paul, you mentioned the need for speed. And one of the problems when we're funding startups or we're co-developing with startups is they can't wait around for months to know, are you still interested? So could both of you talk to how do you bring that sense of urgency or that sense of or that flexibility to your CVC programs so that you can better engage with the startup community? And how do you make that that necessity known to whoever the CVC program is answering to internally?
Yeah, communication's a big part of it. I think, I have to be, sort of communicative about expectations, on both sides. I can tell you firsthand, you do not want to walk into the executive team of a large corporation and say, hey, you have to move a lot faster. This little startup needs the capital or is demanding this, or they're going to, kind of move on. We're going to miss the deal. That does not resonate. I think you had alluded to it earlier, one of maybe the constraints of CVC is we're very sector focused. We're very thematically focused. And so there's a niche of companies that are relevant. At the same time, that's a huge benefit in that we can be really smart on a space. And it also just enables us to talk to companies. It doesn't matter if they're fundraising at the time. If they're relevant to that theme, we want to talk to all those companies and get to know them. And in fact, it's probably better that we do that ahead of a fundraising process, which, yes, they need the capital. They need to make that efficient process for themselves. And so if you already have the relationship, if you've already spoken to them, and maybe you've even started to engage commercially in some way, it just makes it more natural and easy to, sort of hit the mark when the fundraising, process comes up. Certainly we strive to move very fast and move as fast as institutional investors. And that's a big part of, sort of Touchdown's DNA. But at the same time, it doesn't always line up. And so you've got to try to, almost build in, sort of these protections into the process and approach.
So it's a great question. I think in many senses we see a sense of urgency because what we used to call ankle biters are no longer ankle biters that are out there that are trying to enter our space, right? They're well funded, they're well heeled, they have all the knowledge and wherewithal to do something disruptive. So we feel that sense of urgency, which is why we're out here. I think that from moving internally, at least at the OSS, one way that we do this, we actually, we provide funding like everybody else does. We defer an investment to later. We don't take equity up front. We try to make it easy for the company to come and join us, so that there's no, barriers. And then on the other end, if we find that we like them, we can move actually pretty quickly. Within Optum Tech. Optum Tech has its own ability and budget to make investments outside of Corp Dev or outside of the actual Optum Ventures, which would take an equity position. So we've actually put a pretty good program in place where if we see the need, we have the need, I should say, the business says, yes, we need this now. We identified a company that can fill that requirement. We have a process to bring them in pretty quickly. So I'd have to say that we're not lacking in that space. We feel the urgency every day. And, our industry is very public. You see us in the news all the time. Usually not in such a great light. Everybody's complaining about us. but actually putting that aside, we're all consumers of healthcare, right? So we all care about, literally we care about our product because it affects all of us and our families. So there's a lot of ownership, personal ownership among the employees within the company, and incentive to move this thing forward because it really is impactful to everybody, right? It really is impactful, including us as consumers of healthcare. But yeah, we can move fast if we need to.
Okay,
it's also not the best answer per se, but if we feel like there's going to be an issue as far as timing or misalignment in timing, you can always pass on the investment. And in fact, a fast no is oftentimes, it's probably the second best answer to a startup, rather than dragging it out. So, and it can be the basis for, kind of starting the relationship. Maybe it's the next round. Maybe you do a, kind of a second close or an off cycle fundraise or something, but that is always an option too. You don't have to force it.
Right. And we're down to about 3.5 minutes. So I guess my last question I'll pose to the two of you is, it seems like people in these CVC roles are stuck between the startup world, the large incumbent firm. They're also experimenting in domains that are a bit tangential to the organization. They're in rather progressive or new age technology areas. So could you give the audience an idea of what type of individuals are successful as corporate venture capitalists? Or what should you be thinking about when you're building a team for a corporate venture capital unit? so that you can be successful?
Well, that's a great question. So I mentioned at the beginning of my background, I came from startups for 25 years, right? And so my perspective was very different. My sense of urgency was different, but at the same time, my team's probably half of my team are corporate type people, MBA, very knowledgeable about the operations of our company and our lines of businesses, and I think that's critical, right? Because you really need to understand the language and need of our business partners, our internal business partners. At the same time, my team that works directly with the companies, our portfolio companies, has a startup background, has been there before, has done that both successfully and failed, right? You need to have all of it, right? And so they understand the language of the startups. So I think you need both, right? You can't be just the startup side, because then you're not talking the language of the company, right? A lot of times you're missing what they really look for, right? So I have both sets of skills.
Do you have somebody with more of a financial acumen? Because these relationships are being created in the venture capital space. So do you also have people with that skill set?
Yes, and I do have that on my team, but I also have I have a dedicated finance partner, and so whenever I need to get to something specific in detail, I can call on my finance partner, and he'll come in and do whatever we need to get done.
Right, Rich, you got 1 minute.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll echo a lot of what Paul said. I think it's a really good question. It's hard to find one individual that can, sort of play on both sides. And so you really have to think about the composition of the team and trying to sort of build that just like you would at any, with any other function or company or what have you. But yeah, I think it's very, very important to have the professionalism, and be able to, talk to a Fortune 500 type company. But you also have to be able to relate to startups. And so I think we're very fortunate that we've been able to, find a lot of people who can, play a role and have assets on both sides of that. But it really is about team composition.
Great. We do have one question from the audience. So do you have perspective on how many startups large corporations typically take through their incubation and acceleration type programs annually?
Well, we strive for 8 companies per cohort.
And how many cohorts per year?
Right now our cohort is September to end of April.
Yeah, and that's pretty consistent. I think we've seen, sort of 8 to 12 companies in most corporate accelerator cohorts. And then, from if you expand that to include, sort of partnerships and venture investments, it could be dozens, of companies or more, just depending on the scale of the effort.
Great. Thank you. Well, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with all of us. And,
my pleasure.
Thank you. It was fun.